Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new here. If you don't know me, my name is Jen and I originally lived in South Africa and then I moved to England in 1999, and then in 2011 we moved from England to New Zealand, where we have lived since, and I'm now a New Zealand citizen. I get a lot of questions on my channel about moving to New Zealand, and periodically I try and answer them in a video, so I will link the playlist over here if you haven't seen that. I also have a Facebook group because I found that there were questions that I couldn't answer, things that I didn't have experience with, or just that my experience isn't the only one. So if you want some support from other people who are also planning on moving to New Zealand or have recently moved, then check out my Facebook group. It may be the one for you. I will link it down below. Thank you so much to everybody who emails me their stories and their questions. I wish I could respond to you, but there just isn't enough time to personally interact with everybody. But I do want to say thank you because I so appreciate the feedback and knowing that my videos make a difference to you. And I'll try to answer the questions here in video format if you have sent me a question, because chances are other people will have the same question as well. Please remember that I am neither qualified nor legally allowed to give immigration advice. All I can do is speak from my own experience, and if you want any in-depth information, I would recommend you look on the immigration website or contact a licensed immigration advisor. Okay, on to the questions. What things do you wish you had shipped but didn't, and what things did you ship but in retrospect realize you shouldn't have? And also who to recommend for shipping. So we used PSS for shipping and we would recommend them. I will link them down below. We chose to ship everything that we had. Now, we didn't have a super huge amount. We had a 20-foot container and we filled that chock-a-block to the brim. Most of our furniture we dismantled and flat packed as much as we could, and there were a few items that we had set aside as maybes, that if the container was too full and we couldn't fit them in, we were happy to discard them, but we managed to fit in everything that we had. I can't think of anything that I wish we'd brought that we didn't. I mean, it has been a while, but honestly I can't think of anything that I wish we'd brought over, because like I said, we brought as much as we could. Things that we brought over that we could have done without were curtains. So initially we rented 2 different places before we bought our own house, and in both of the rentals curtains were supplied, and our curtains wouldn't fit because our curtains are the type that have the eyelets at the top. Most of our curtains had the eyelets at the top, so you put the curtain onto a curtain pole. But when we were renting, they were rails, like curtain rails with hooks, so our curtains wouldn't work anyway. But also the window configuration was different. In England, our house had very high ceilings and very tall windows, so our curtains were very long. The windows were very narrow. In New Zealand, there were more windows, so one room would have like windows on 2 different walls, where in England there would have just been one window, things like that. The curtains just didn't work. Also, the curtains in New Zealand tend to be thermal lined, and the ones that we had from England were not thermal lined. So even after we bought our own house, we ended up just getting suitable curtains for the rooms in our house and selling all of the curtains that I had brought over. So I guess that's one thing that I not regret bringing, because I ended up making money when I sold them, but it was unnecessary to bring. I wouldn't recommend bringing curtains. So I mentioned we used PSS for shipping. They were excellent. We had door-to-door service. We didn't have any problems with them, and we would recommend them. Next question is, hate to bug you, no pun intended, because you seem like a very busy person, but I have watched all of your videos on YouTube, but none that cover bugs. I've seen the spiders online and heard about a cricket-like insect called a weta. How prevalent are insects, these in particular, in a day-to-day scenario? So insects, I don't see anything scary. We don't really have scary insects over here. I'll insert a picture here of what a weta looks like, and that can be quite intimidating. We have come across a couple, usually if they're injured, but I'm talking like maybe 3, like in a domestic setting, like, you know, near our house, not like out in the bush. Maybe 3 in the past, how long have I been here? So it's not a big deal. If you see them, just leave them alone. Spiders, we do get house spiders. Some of them can be quite big, but they're harmless. The white-tailed spider, if we see any of those, we kill them because they can leave a really nasty bite and they can hide in clothes. I wouldn't leave your clothes lying on the floor once I picked up a pair of shorts and I was about to put it on and a white-tailed spider fell out. But it's really not something that I worry about or that is an issue on a day-to-day basis. And this was important to me, and this is one of the reasons we didn't move to Australia. Not the only reason. I know I'm going to get Australians going, oh, the bugs here are not a big deal. It was just one of the many reasons we chose not to move to Australia. So the bugs that I deal with on a daily basis would be the occasional house spider. Like I said, if it's not a whitetail, I just leave them alone because they catch flies and I hate flies. In summer we can get mosquitoes, especially if you go walking like in the bush or something, you can get mosquitoes. And sandflies. Sandflies are an issue. I talked about this in my pros and cons video about sandflies, and a lot of people said I was overreacting. When I first moved over here, I would get bitten by a sandfly and it would be this massive, awful reaction and a severe itching, and it just went on for weeks. I have found that over the years my body has kind of built up a tolerance and I don't get as bad of a reaction to sandflies now, but they still love me and I still get bitten. If I don't put on like essential oils or bug spray before going out and working in my garden, I will get bitten by sandflies. And if I'm going to the beach or hiking or anywhere where they're likely to be sandflies, I will just usually spray my legs from about the knees down because sandflies tend to stay low. Flies, house flies, if it's a hot day, there'll be lots of flies. Like in summer there's lots of flies. This summer we haven't really had hot weather. It's been very cool and kind of windy and rainy and just not normal for summer. And then we had a couple of days where it was like 30 degrees and there were so many flies hatching and there were just flies everywhere. But it's not unbearable. White cabbage butterflies in the garden. I have to net my brassicas at the moment because the white cabbage butterflies are everywhere and laying their eggs, and their little caterpillars want to eat all of my broccoli and cabbages and things, but that's I think normal anyway. What other insects? Oh, cicadas. I haven't actually heard any cicadas this summer. Again, we haven't had a proper long hot summer, but that is the sound of summer. You'll hear the cicadas singing. Sometimes you will see them. They really don't bother you, and if you just leave them alone, they leave you alone. So that is my take on the insects of New Zealand. Next question. I was hoping that you maybe know of the right legal agency that can assist us, or that you know of another way we can start the immigration process. We have no idea where to start and are so afraid to pay someone and it end up being a scam. I get this question a lot about who to recommend for helping with the visa, to advise on which visa for this particular situation and to help that process go smoothly. And there are scammers out there for sure. But there are also very helpful, legitimate agencies, and the one that I recommend is New Zealand Shores. They are accredited, they are helpful, they are professional. I will link them down below. I have done an interview with one of the agents from that agency, and I will link that over here. And I've also done a video called Pros and Cons of Using an Immigration Agent, and I will link that down below or in a card up here so that you can check that out and see if it's the right choice for you to use an agent to help you with your application. Next question is, how many weeks of holidays are common in New Zealand? Are they covered or unpaid? So I actually wrote notes here. 20 days is usual, like 20 working days, plus your statutory public holidays. So the statutory days are the 1st and 2nd of January or the first 2 weekdays following the 1st and 2nd of January. So if the 1st and 2nd fall on a Saturday and Sunday, then it will be the Monday and Tuesday that will be a holiday. 6th of February only if it's a weekday, that's Waitangi Day. Easter Friday and Monday. 25th of April only if it's a weekday, otherwise you just don't get that as a holiday. Queen's Birthday Monday is a holiday. Labor Day, which is end of October, and the 25th and 26th of December, or if they fall on a weekend, then the following 2 working days. So those are the statutory public holidays, and then generally about 20 days of leave, which I guess may vary from employer to employer, but that is usual. Next question is, would you know of any immigrants with teenage children, and if so, did they find the transition very difficult with having teenagers? So we moved over when our kids were 6 and 9 years old, and I do know of other people who have moved over with teenagers. If you're wanting to touch base with parents of teens who are making this move, then I would recommend joining my Facebook group and getting in touch with each other there and sharing your experiences, because I didn't have that experience. I had the question, is the tap water generally safe to drink? And I would say yes. I don't know of any areas in New Zealand where it's not safe to drink, but I'm sure they would let you know if that was the case. I haven't had any problems with the tap water here. Another question was, how long does it take for the work visa application to be decided? I had a few questions of that, and I see that question come up in the group a lot. And how long did it take for us to get residency and things like that? So we got residency before we moved over to New Zealand, but this was in 2011. So everything changes, and it changes quite quickly, and it changes all the time. So my experience then is not really relevant to the timelines now, but if you're curious, we submitted our application in February, and I believe it was beginning of May that we got our visas. I see this question in our Facebook group a lot, and people always chime in saying this is how long it took us. So again, the Facebook group, I know I keep pushing you over there, but it's just because I don't have all of the answers. I haven't had experience with some issues like moving over with teenagers, or shipping pets, or particular areas, or particular jobs. And there are so many members in that group now that they can just help each other out or direct each other to groups that are more helpful. And I want your questions to be answered, and I just am not able to answer them all myself. So that's why I keep mentioning my group. But yeah, it varies a lot, and there'll be people applying at the same time, but they have different circumstances, and it can take a different amount of time. And it's just one of those things that I know it's easy to say, it's so hard to do. You just have to be patient. It's just going to take as long as it takes. And when we started with the whole process, I could not wrap my head around how all of the things that we needed to take care of were going to line up time-wise, like how everything was going to slot into place in the right order at the right time. I just couldn't fathom, because so much of it is beyond your control, but it just does. It just works out. So just have patience, have faith, and just keep going, and it should all work out in the end. Another common question I see is which cell phone provider to go with. I'm not sure if I've answered this before, but it depends on your area. So when we lived in Auckland, I was with Vodafone and I had no problems. We moved down to where I am now, which is South Taranaki, and I had no signal. I could not get signal in my own house. Well, I could if I went and like stood by one of our sheds in the garden, or in a particular spot in the house, and angled my phone just right, and that's just not acceptable. So I switched to Skinny, and I have no problems now. I've traveled, I haven't had any problems with Skinny, and it's so inexpensive. I just do pay as you go, and I opt for the $16 per 28 days program, and that gives me texts and calls and data, and it's sufficient for my needs, and I'm not locked into a contract. But it does vary from area to area which cell phone provider provides the most coverage. So I guess once you know which area you're going to, then maybe ask locals, like in a local group, which one they would recommend. A question about housing: would it be cheaper to build a brick and tile house outside Auckland, or go for an old wood fixer-upper in Auckland and DIY as the money comes in? I am underqualified to answer this. I've never done either of those things, but in my personal opinion, I would go for the brick and tile house outside of Auckland, because your land is going to be so much cheaper that even when you do the land and house package and get it built, I just feel like that would be cheaper than buying a fixer-upper in Auckland, which is still going to be extortionately expensive. And DIY in New Zealand is not cheap. We did loads of DIY in England, came to New Zealand, and it is shockingly expensive. And the problem with buying an old fixer-upper is you buy it thinking you know what needs doing, and then when you start doing the work, you open a can of worms. So you might start stripping wallpaper, and then chunks of plaster start coming off the wall, and so you decide to replaster, and you take that apart, and then you realize the wiring needs doing, and that's a whole nother job. And those kinds of things can happen, and there may be a lot of remedial work that needs doing, like insulation that's never been sufficient, which needs to be put in, things like that, old windows that need to be replaced. So in my opinion, it would probably work out cheaper to do a brick and tile new build, or buy a brick and tile house outside of Auckland. It's pretty much guaranteed to be cheaper to buy anything outside of Auckland than in Auckland, but that's just my opinion. I also get a lot of questions to myself and in the group about short-term accommodation when first moving over to New Zealand. So we actually secured our rental property before we moved to New Zealand. When we first came over, we had a friend pick us up from the airport. We stayed at her house, I think 1 or 2 nights, and then we moved into our house that we had rented. So we didn't have to find short-term accommodation when we immediately arrived, but I would recommend Airbnb or Book a Batch or Booking.com, and I will link them all down below. With Airbnb, if you are renting for a month, you often get cheaper rates. For example, we have an Airbnb guest cottage that we rent out, and if you rent for 30 days or longer, you get a 40% discount. It's still going to be expensive than what you would normally pay, like renting a house. I know it's really difficult to know how long to book for, because you may find a rental really quickly or you may struggle for weeks, but honestly, that's just the best route to go. An Airbnb, you can have a place that's got everything that you need to live with while your stuff's being shipped over and while you're looking for a place to rent, and just factored into the expenses of moving over. I did a video about why immigration is so expensive and all of the different things to budget for. I will link that video over here. And that short-term accommodation when you first arrive in New Zealand is one of the things you need to just budget for, and it can be expensive. Next question is, how does it work with health insurance? Who pays how much of it? So in New Zealand, you don't need to have health insurance. You have free health care on the public health system. This may depend on the visa that you're on. Like I said, we came over on residency and we qualified for public health care. So do check that, whichever visa you're on, if it includes healthcare. Some people still choose to have private health insurance, and there are different programs and different levels and different plans that you can purchase, and some jobs will offer that as a perk, either part or fully provide the health insurance cover. So that will vary from like job to job. We just use the public health and we've never had a problem with it. Okay, I think this video is getting long enough. I still have more questions and I always have questions coming in, so I will be doing more of these in the future. Do check out the playlist if you haven't seen it before and see if your question has been covered in my other videos. And don't forget to join the Facebook group if you are wanting to get information from people other than myself. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.